our next stitch is couching stitch. This is one of my favorite stitches. So here it is. You can use it both as an outline stitch or as a fill stitch, as I've used it here. And again, you can play with the colors. So in this example, I've used one color for the laid thread, and that is the pink one. And then I kept changing the color for the couching thread. So this is the tiny little stitches that's holding the laid thread in place. So as well as playing with the colors, you can also play with the thickness of the thread. So if your laid thread and your couching thread was the same color and the same thickness, you would get a very subtle look and feel to it. But as soon as you change one of them, so in this case, or actually it's two of them in this case, my laid thread, I think this is 4 strands of embroidery thread, and then the couching thread is 2 strands. But imagine if I'd used 4 strands for the couching thread as well, then they would stand out a lot more and it would give it a completely different texture. And for this, usually it's a bit difficult to embroider with yarn like you would use for knitting or crochet on this sort of fabric. But with couching you can actually do it, because you really only need to get the laid thread through the fabric and then down again to secure it. You're not continually stitching it, so you could combine knitting yarn with some embroidery thread and get a really interesting texture from it. So here's another example of couching used as a fill stitch, where I tried to use the couching thread to give it a sort of almost woven look to it. And this is, I don't know if you can see, but this is a heavier embroidery thread, and the name of it escapes me right now. But I really like the contrast between the laid thread and the couching thread. The couching thread here is just regular embroidery thread or embroidery floss. So let's try it. So I'm going to use 2 different colors. Like I said, you can use 1 color, you can use 2, or you can use lots of colors if you like. So you come up from the back with the laid thread, and in this case I'm using 4 strands as well. And apart from coming up one place and going back down somewhere else, you're not really stitching with the laid thread. So you can just sort of leave the needle and the bulk of the thread sort of out of the way. You will need to use the thread, of course, but you don't want it all right where you're working. So then lay out your thread so that it roughly follows the line that you're stitching, and then you come up along the line and then hold the laid thread in place if you can, and then make a tiny little stitch with your couching thread over the laid thread. It doesn't really matter if you're stitching from right to left or left to right. I think I probably tend to stitch from right to left, maybe because I'm right-handed. Now, so if you come to a corner, as you will when you're stitching the D, come up so that you're sort of in the corner, but maybe just outside, or rather just inside it if you're stitching from right to left. And then turn the work, and then insert the needle on the corner and pull it down so that the corner stitch is at a slight diagonal, and then turn the work around and just come up with your couching needle, and again just put the laid thread so that it's roughly following the line you want it to follow. And it's okay if it's a little bit loose. You can always pull at it slightly to adjust it. So like this, I have a little bubble here, so I can just lightly pull at the thread and that pulls it nice and neat. So I'm just coming up, and usually I just use my needle to make a laid thread follow the direction I want it to. And if it is a little bit, if the couched or the laid thread is a little bit wobbly, that's fine. As I said, you can adjust it. So I usually do a few stitches, a few couching stitches. So now it's sort of going all over the place, but if I just gently pull it, and then it will follow the direction I want it to go in. So when you get to the end of your couched line, just again, just sort of adjust things, make sure that they are how you want them to be. And then you can insert your laid thread to the back. And depending on your design, you may want to just do a little couching stitch across that end there. And that's how you do the couching stitch. So let's try it on the actual sampler. So I made a little start, and again here I'm using 4 strands for my laid thread and 2 strands, I think, yes, 2 strands for the couching thread. So as you can see, I've stopped here because I wanted to show you what to do if you need to stop, if your thread isn't long enough. So obviously I've taken my needle and thread down and secured the other thread on the back. To start again, I come up in the same place where I finished my previous laid thread. I'm not sure what's going on here. Maybe maybe I didn't secure it on the back. Let's just have a little look here. Alright, I'll have to sort that out later. So as I said, I will come up in the same place where I finished the previous thread, and then obviously this is my laid thread. So I just put that over here so that it's out of the way, but going roughly in the direction that I will be going. So now to conceal this place where I finished and started the 2 threads, I'm going to do a couching stitch over that spot. And maybe not pull it quite as tightly. Like that, because then you can't tell where the join is. And then I can just carry on using my needle to guide the laid thread. And after every sort of 4 or 5 couching stitches, I'll just adjust my laid thread so that it's nice and even, or evenish. And I just carry on. So I'm just gonna carry on until I get over to this point, and then I'll show you how to do the next line. One thing I should mention is how long or how far apart should your couching stitches be. It kind of depends on how thick your laid thread is, and also the kind of look you want. If you want it to be very close to the fabric and not sort of have too much texture like this one does, you would space them closer to each other. But approximately sort of 3 to 4 millimeters apart, maybe. You can also experiment and see what you prefer. If your couching stitches are a little bit wonky, so that maybe your laid stitch is a little bit wonky as well, don't worry too much about it, because this whole shape will be filled in. No one's gonna notice. Right, so now I am at the end, coming back to where I started. So I'm going to pull the laid thread so that it lays across the bit where it joins the start of the thread, but pull it slightly to the right. And I'm going to couch it in place there where the join is, again, so you won't notice it. So now as you carry on, so then you want your laid thread to be between the needle and the previous line of couching. You can either make the following rows of couching stitches. Oh, something funky is going on with my thread here. You can either make it so that they alternate, or so that they line up. So again, if we look at my previous sampler, so here they more or less alternate, except for the corners, because you need that stitch in the corner to make the corner nice and sharp. But if we look at this one, I did line them up more or less. It's a little bit wonky, but never mind. It's up to you what you prefer, if you want them lining up or alternating. Actually, as I'm working the second row and the ones following them, I actually prefer coming up with the needle first, especially in a place like the corner, and then sort of laying my thread around the needle. I'm not sure why, I just feel like that works best for me. So that I basically make the space, but it's not very big space, for the laid thread, and then I stitch it in place. But you can either do it this way or do it like I showed for the first row. Getting caught up in my other needle. Right, so then you just carry on all the way around to the join, and then you move on to the next row and just carry on until the whole D is filled in with couching stitch. The tutorial you have just watched is part of a series of 31 stitch tutorials that I have made to go along with the pattern for this embroidery stitch sampler. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. If you want to check out the pattern, you can find the link in the description. And whatever you're making, happy stitching.